Thank you very much, Khalil, and thank you very much for hosting us here in your great hall for such an important event, the launch of the Canadian Development Report. And thank you for mentioning International Development Week. It's especially fitting to have such an event today taking place during International Development Week. Les Canadiennes ont toujours été des citoyennes actives et engagées. Et maintenant, plus que jamais, les Canadiens de toutes les couches de la société, peu importe leur âge ou leur lieu de résidence, participant au développement international, des étudiants, les volontaires, des stagiaires, des professionnels de la médecine, des avocats, les entreprises privées, les municipalités, les universités et les organisations de la société civile. Cette semaine, un peu partout au pays, les Canadiens participent à des activités régionales et nationales, mettent en valeur le développement international qui permettent, entre autres, à des jeunes Canadiens d'inspirer d'autres par leur exemple. International Development Week this year is putting an accent on women and girls and the profoundly positive impact that the lives that women and girls can play, not just in terms of their own aspirations and their own opportunities, but for their families, their communities, their societies, and their economies. I'd also like to take this opportunity, as Khalil did, to congratulate, the North-South Institute and Joe and his team and those who came before as well for topping the annual global ratings for the small budget think tanks. Now, small budget doesn't mean small aspiration or small impact, small but mighty. The Global Go-To report is considered a really the influential barometer of research by academics, public policy experts, peers, and journalists, and this recognition is hugely well-deserved, and I think actually captures the ambition that the Institute set for itself to be a world-class center. L'ACDI collabore avec l'Institut Nord-Sud dans le but de jouer un rôle de premier plan pour analyser les défis en matière de développement international et de définir les politiques et des pratiques novatrices dans ce domaine. And today we'll be seeing some of the results of CIDA's collaboration. I'm not going to give too much of a preview, but here we're going to have the Canadian International Development Platform, which is going to be launched here today, again, based in part on CIDA's open data. And this platform is another example of how we can collaborate together, and this, of course, is very much in spirit of the Government of Canada's Open Government Initiative. And this year's Canadian Development Report, I think we're really pleased that this report on global challenges and multilateral solutions is another example of our collaboration and having the roots in the NSI Forum in June on the future of multilateral development cooperation that we were so happy to be able to support. The June Forum, which I attended, as did Minister Oda, was really one of the premier events that we've had in this town for some time, a really substantive conference, very stimulating, and it was also very prescient, coming as it did many months, 6 months in advance of the high-level forum in Busan. And I actually spent my weekend, Joe, rereading the papers and thinking, wow, all those issues actually played out in Busan. And I thought what I would do in part today was connect some of those themes from the forum with some of the themes and the outcomes that came out of Busan. For many of us, I think Busan was more than, and was intended to be more than just the fourth in a series, the fourth milestone of high-level fora on aid effectiveness. And it was in many ways, not just a turning point, it was really in many ways a tipping point. It made, in its own way, the shift from aid back to where it probably always should have been, to development, and from aid effectiveness to development cooperation. Not new concepts, not mutually exclusive, but significant nonetheless. And this shift had a number of salutary effects. In my mind, first of all, it put the focus back on the developing countries themselves, which, of course, Paris and Accra did, but this put them back in the driver's seats, their needs, their priorities, but also their responsibilities, their ownership, and not just about governments, but economies, societies, all sectors. Second, this shift put aid in its proper context, in its proper place. as a channel for resources and expertise that is often critically important, maybe in some cases indispensable, at its best, truly catalytic, and of course what has to be done effectively and efficiently. But assistance was never intended to be a substitute for domestic capacity, domestic resource mobilization, private sector growth and innovation. And one great takeaway from Busan was it brought the role of the private sector back, or put it into the mainstream of the development agenda. A third shift out of Busan was a shift from aid to development that led to taking the focus away from what I often come to see as this incessant discussion of modalities, and I come from CIDA and we talk about them a lot, what I call the how of international assistance, which are really important, and that was a lot about Accra was about to get that right, but it put it back on the ends, the what's, the results that we're trying to achieve. And it had always been there, but sometimes in our discussions, certainly in country, sometimes at these international fora, we were all captured by a large discussion around dialogue and modalities that probably began to lose the point. And fourth, and probably most important, in Busan, the shift from aid to development cooperation opened the door for new emerging economies and donors to become part of the collective development effort. Now, Joe, in the foreword to his new volume, he talks about how much the future depends on the extent to which new economic powers and donors are prepared to engage in collective efforts to solve global problems. And this was a theme that was running throughout the June Forum and remains in the volume. And going into Busan, the engagement of new players like China, India, and Brazil was set by many as the bar of success. It defined success for Busan. And their support was considered to be essential if Busan was to be comprehensive, to be inclusive, and at the end of the day, relevant for the future and even for the present. At the same time, for many of us, and sometimes Canada was a little bit of a skunk at this picnic, this couldn't come at the price of compromising core principles of effectiveness, accountability, and transparency. In our view, we felt there could not be a double standard, a differentiated set of responsibilities, not if we believe that these principles actually are the key to sustainable development results. And in the end, I think in large part due to a little backpatting here for Canada, working with Australia, we actually helped, I think, to have Busan come out in a better place where the principles of Busan are actually now been not adopted, but have the new donors have come under them. And now that set the stage for a truly global partnership on development. So what's this new global partnership, little g, little p, little capital G, capital P? What's it going to look like? Well, there was much discussion going into Busan, at discussion, and at Busan, and at the June Forum of what this new aid architecture was going to look like. And no doubt we're going to end up with some new aid architecture with some new steering committee and lots of working groups, and hopefully it'll be a very light and effective touch. And I think the OECD showed great wisdom and great maturity, knowing that out of Busan it was going to have to let go of its aid effectiveness baby and let others take on the parenting of this new global partnership. So what's going to replace, though, the working groups and the OECD DAC and all that outreach? Well, I was rereading these volumes, and I haven't read the source document, but I did go into all the footnotes, and there's some citations there about Kara, Mako, and Guy, who are referred to in Shannon's paper, and Shannon and Hanny's paper, where they talked about, aid architecture is really a noodle, and then they also talk about this new ecosystem, which really might be a more appropriate way to think about the future of how we're all going to work together, rather than something more static, like a new architecture. And this new ecosystem, they say, and I believe this, will be an interaction among many different development actors, and they're going to be governed, almost self-governed, by a set of guidelines, responsibilities, and accountabilities. And in my view, the future probably lies in these self-governing, dare I say even coalitions of the willing, working in common cause, on common objectives with shared principles. And I'd like to speak briefly about two current examples that we're heavily involved with. Very practical examples, but this is, I think, where the future probably lies. And the first, you won't be surprised for me to say, is in the area of maternal and child health, where Canada's G8 Muskoka initiative, combined and leading on to the UN Secretary General's global strategy on women and children's health, have really been fused into a global agenda that now is really galvanizing developing countries, bilateral donors, multilateral organizations, CSOs, the private sector, toward a common objective. And this global effort has been turned into a concrete action plan, in large part as a result of the work of the UN Commission on Information and Accountability for Women and Children's Health that our Prime Minister co-chaired with President Kikwete of Tanzania. And the Commission's recommendations that we're now working with the WHO and others to put into practice really took those 8 effectiveness principles that we've all been talking about and really put that country ownership back into its own context and the alignment where it should be centered on the use, on the priorities and plans, country compacts on the ground. And these country compacts can be the vehicle by which all development, it sounds like we're already doing this, but we haven't been, a vehicle by which all development partners, not just bilateral donors or multilaterals, but CSOs, private sector, et cetera, can actually align their resources and their efforts and report visibly and transparently on what they're doing. More significantly, I think the contribution of the Commission was that not only did it focus on transparency and accountability, but it agreed to a common set of result metrics, indicators that we can all use now to basically align our programming and our results frameworks and also our reporting and significantly reduce the reporting burden for everybody and also so that we can begin to learn from each other. And it may not sound revolutionary, but I'm convinced that it can be. And Dr. Margaret Chan from the WHO was here with us in November, and she called it game-changing, and I think it truly can be. If for once you can, I see Kevin's over here, if you can have all the Canadian NGOs, international NGOs, ourselves, the multilaterals all working on a common scorecard and with the developing countries in the driver's seat. The second example I'd like to give, it's very kind of similar, again, very organic in the way it's come forward, is the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, or SUN. This again is bringing together global, national, multi-stakeholders attention together on the critical importance of nutrition, and it also spans the agricultural and the health fields, which is pretty difficult to do. And like the global strategy on women and children's health, SUN is anchored in country-led plans. It embodies common framework of goals and objectives, monitoring and evaluation, and common indicators. And SUN is a unique platform, again, because it really does bring the private sector into the same conversation, civil society in, foundations and donors. It's never been done before, and it can't be governed by the same kinds of rules that we had in it's not really an IFI, it's not really a multilateral organization, it's a movement. And that, I think, is probably one of the trends that we're going to see in the future. And it'll work because the developing countries and everybody, because it's going to produce results. And Canada, I'm very proud to say, has played a leadership role in the launch of the SUN framework, and we're also working in country to help countries themselves work on the SUN framework and programming. So finally, I'd just like to turn a little bit to the issue of transparency. And this figured really much more prominently in Busan than it's always been there, but than it did in Busan, than it did in Accra and in Paris. And when I said before that our efforts need to be governed by some common set of guidelines and responsibilities, and we need to be measured against our results and be accountable for them and accountable for what we do. But for all this to be meaningful, we absolutely have to be transparent. And transparency is the key. This better information that can be utilized and adapt and analyze is really going to be the key to not just monitoring what's going on, but hopefully to learning how we can do everything better in terms of results. So for my mind, it's not just a gimmick, and yours won't be for sure. It really can be a transformative way to change the dynamic and the conversation around development. So for our part, at CIDA, what we've done is with our Open Data Initiative as part of the Open Government Initiative is we've put our data online. And we've also, and Minister Oda did this on the eve of Busan, and we were very happy to say that it was a day before Secretary Clinton did it for the United States, is that we joined on to the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which is actually more of a statistical challenge than one would think for the agency, but we really think it's an important thing to do. And what IADI can do in terms of providing standardized common data sets for all donors is it allows everybody in this room and beyond, and everybody in developing countries to actually begin to hold people to account and to learn and to analyze. And for me, the key feature of the transparency agenda is that it really reinforces the democratic accountability of governments to their citizens and empowers citizens to in turn hold their governments to account. And that probably is one of the most transformative things of the Transparency Initiative. CIDA is going to, we can't do all the Star Wars interesting things that you're going to be doing necessarily, but we're going to have a mobile application to share our data, and this mobile app is going to be coming on stream pretty soon, so that people, if you really want to, can basically track us, track what we're doing. And for us at the agency, we view this very much as a culture change. And in government, I think it is a culture change. What we're doing actually, from the moment you conceive of something, you have to think about how you should be actually sharing this information with Canadians. In closing, I'd really just like to thank the Institute again for hosting us here this evening, for playing such a prominent role worldwide, but also here being leaders inside Canada for the analysis and dialogue around development issues, and for taking the risk of developing innovative ways of working on development issues, sort of like what we're going to be seeing this afternoon. So thank you very much. Congratulations to the Institute. Thank you to Khalil, and I really look forward to the discussion.